The autumn of 1889 arrived in Tennessee with a persistent mist that clung to the valleys like ghostly fingers. Professor Thomas Blackwood descended from the carriage in Hollow Creek, a village that seemed frozen in time, nestled between hills covered with ancient pines. The air carried an aroma of damp earth and resin, while the leaden sky promised rain. Blackwood adjusted his thin-framed glasses over his aquiline nose and observed the main street of the village. Modest establishments lined both sides, and the few passers-by cast suspicious glances at the well-dressed stranger with his leather briefcase. "Professor Blackwood, I presume?" A hoarse voice interrupted his thoughts. An elderly man with a graying beard and eyes as clear as spring water approached. "I am Jeremiah Tanner, responsible for the boarding house. We received your letter 2 weeks ago." Thomas nodded, shaking the man's calloused hand. "I appreciate your hospitality, Mr. Tanner. I hope not to be a bother for too long." "Depends on what you consider bothering," replied Jeremiah with a tense smile. "It's not common for us to receive historians interested in the Ahsfens." As they walked down the dirt road, Thomas noticed how conversations ceased as he passed. Windows closed and curtains moved subtly. "The Ahsfen property is about 3 miles north," explained Jeremiah, pointing to a trail that snaked between the pines. "No one has gone there for decades. They say the place has been cursed since the fire." "Local superstitions," commented Thomas with a slight smile. "My interest is purely academic. The Ahsfen family represents a fascinating chapter in the colonization of Tennessee." Jeremiah stopped abruptly, his eyes fixed on Thomas's. "There aren't just superstitions on those lands, Professor. There are truths that this village preferred to bury along with the dead." At the boarding house, a 2-story wooden building with a wide porch, Thomas was led to a simple room on the 2nd floor. The window offered a view of the dense forest that seemed to swallow the horizon. That night, as he organized his notes by lamplight, a soft knock sounded at the door. A young woman of no more than 20, brown hair tied in a simple bun, and dark eyes that seemed to carry the weight of ancient secrets, entered with a tray. "Tea and biscuits, sir. I'm Eleanor, Mr. Tanner's niece." Thomas thanked her, noticing how the young woman hesitated at the door, as if wanting to say something more. "Is there something I can help you with, Miss Eleanor?" She bit her lower lip, looking nervously at the corridor. "Do you really intend to go to the Ahsfen property?" "Certainly. It's the purpose of my visit." Eleanor approached, lowering her voice. "My grandmother worked for them. She was just a girl when the fire happened." Her eyes shone with a mixture of fear and fascination. She never spoke much about it, but she kept a diary. "If you're really interested in the truth," Thomas felt his heart quicken, "I would be extremely grateful for any material I could consult. Meet me tomorrow at dawn, behind the boarding house. There are things about the Ahsfens that shouldn't be discussed under this roof." When Eleanor left, Thomas approached the window. In the distance, among the pines, he could have sworn he saw a solitary light blinking in the darkness, like a vigilant eye watching over the village of Hollow Creek. The morning brought with it a fine drizzle that transformed the sunlight into a golden penumbra. Thomas met Eleanor as arranged, behind the boarding house, near a small barn. She carried a package wrapped in waxed cloth, protected from the moisture. "This is my grandmother Martha's diary," explained Eleanor, handing over the package with trembling hands. "She served as a maid in the Ahsfen mansion for almost 10 years, until the fire of 1856. Thomas received the package with reverence. "Are you sure I can keep this?" "For now, but there's one condition." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "You must tell me everything you discover. This village has kept secrets for too long." Agreeing with a nod, Thomas tucked the diary into his coat. "I plan to visit the property today. Do you know anyone who could guide me?" Eleanor shook her head. "No one in Hollow Creek approaches that place voluntarily, but the main trail is still visible. Follow the north path until the fork marked by a twisted oak. Take the left and continue until you see the iron gates." Hours later, Thomas walked along the muddy trail, Martha's diary secure in his backpack along with writing equipment and a small archaeologist's trowel. The surrounding forest seemed to be watching him, the tall pines blocking much of the light, creating a world of restless shadows. He found the oak mentioned by Eleanor, an ancient tree with a trunk twisted as if it had been molded by pain. Following to the left, the trail became narrower, almost swallowed by vegetation. After almost an hour of walking, Thomas spotted the gates. Huge wrought iron structures, partially consumed by rust, adorned with what appeared to be the Ahsfen family crest, a pine tree intertwined with a serpent. The gates were ajar, as if inviting unwary visitors. The property beyond gradually revealed itself. A long avenue flanked by pines led to a clearing where the charred remains of the Ahsfen mansion still stood. What had once been an imposing three-story residence was now nothing more than partially collapsed walls, exposed beams and debris covered by decades of invasive vegetation. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. There was something deeply wrong with this place, an unnatural silence, as if even the birds avoided flying over the property. Approaching the ruins, he noticed that part of the main structure was still standing. What appeared to have been the entrance hall and a side wing had survived the fire, although they were in an advanced state of deterioration. Carefully, Thomas entered the mansion. The wooden floor creaked beneath his feet, and the smell of mold and decomposition permeated the air. Rays of light penetrated through holes in the roof, illuminating dust particles that danced like tiny specters. In a room that seemed to have been an office, Thomas found the remains of a bookshelf. Most of the volumes had been destroyed by fire or moisture over the years, but in a partially charred drawer, he discovered a set of documents protected by a metal box. Sitting on an improvised bench made of debris, he first opened Martha's diary. The handwriting was delicate, although the pages had yellowed with time. April 10th, 1850. Lady Ahsfen summoned the maids to the chapel tonight. It's the third time this month. No one dares to question, but we all fear these meetings. The chants in a strange language, the burning herbs that make our vision blur. Josephine fainted again. When she woke up, she remembered nothing, but had strange marks on her wrists. Thomas turned a few pages. June 2nd, 1851. I found young Thomas Ahsfen crying in the attic. He said his grandmother locked him there as punishment for entering the forbidden cellar. When I asked what he saw there, the boy just trembled and said, "They're not dead, Martha. None of them are really dead." And further on, October 17th, 1855. Something terrible happened in the forest last night. Lady Ahsfen and her sisters took 3 young women from the village to the stone clearing. They said it was a harvest celebration. Only one young woman returned, and she has been in a catatonic state ever since. Mr. Ahsfen is furious, but not about the atrocities. He fears the family will be exposed. Read the last entry, dated 3 days before the fire, made Thomas hold his breath. March 14th, 1856. I discovered the truth about the basement, the tunnels, the symbols on the walls, the bones. So many bones, generations of secrets buried beneath this house. Lady Ahsfen saw me. She said I now belong to the family forever. Tomorrow there will be a ceremony in the chapel. I fear it will be the last time I write in this diary. If anyone finds these words, the Ahsfens don't die. They just change. And those who know their secrets never leave these lands. Thomas closed the diary, feeling his mouth dry. He turned his attention to the documents found in the mansion. They were mainly financial records, land deeds, and correspondence. One letter in particular caught his attention, sent by a Nashville lawyer, dated January 1856. Regarding the accusations against your family, I advise maximum discretion. The bodies found on neighboring lands cannot be linked to the Ahsfens without concrete evidence. However, rumors are spreading. I suggest considering Judge Harrington's proposal. A new beginning may be necessary, even if it means temporarily abandoning the ancestral property. As he was storing the documents, Thomas heard a crack. He was no longer alone in the ruins. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed on the rotten wooden floor, approaching the room where he was. Thomas froze, the documents still in his hands. The footsteps approached slowly, deliberately, as if whoever it was knew every unstable board in the floor. Quickly, he stored the papers in his backpack and looked for a place to hide. No need to hide, Professor Blackwood. The voice was female, elderly, with a timbre that seemed to echo unnaturally in the confined space. A woman of approximately 70 appeared in the entrance to the room. She wore simple but well-kept clothes, and her white hair was tied in a severe bun. Her eyes, however, were what stood out most, of such a clear blue that they seemed almost transparent, like thin ice over deep water. "How do you know my name?" Thomas asked, trying to maintain his composure. The woman smiled, a gesture that didn't reach her eyes. "Hollow Creek is a small village, Professor. News travels fast, especially when it involves outsiders interested in the Ahsfens." She approached, examining the room with familiarity. "I am Agatha Winters. I knew this house in better times." "You knew the Ahsfen family?" "Knew?" Agatha laughed softly. "I know them, Professor. Some families leave marks too deep to be erased by time or by fire." Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. The fire of 1856. There are conflicting records about what really happened. Official records rarely tell the complete truth. Agatha walked to the window, looking at the overgrown grounds of the property. "You found Martha's diary, I presume?" Thomas hesitated before confirming. "Did you know Martha?" "She was my aunt." Agatha turned to face him. "Eleanor didn't mention that, I imagine. The girl knows only fragments of the story." "The diary ends abruptly, 3 days before the fire." "Yes. Martha never wrote another word after that night." Agatha's eyes momentarily seemed lost in distant memories. "There's a place you need to see, Professor. The family chapel. It's the only building the fire didn't touch." Thomas followed Agatha out of the mansion ruins. They walked along a path almost completely covered by vegetation, moving away from the main house toward a small grove of particularly dense pines. "The Ahsfens were not an ordinary family," explained Agatha as they walked. "They came from Europe in the early 18th century, fleeing from something they never mentioned. They brought wealth, knowledge, and practices that local settlers would consider blasphemous." "What kind of practices?" "The Ahsfens believed that death was merely a temporary inconvenience, Professor. They believed that with the right rituals, a person's essence could be preserved and transferred." Among the trees, a small stone structure began to reveal itself. Unlike the mansion, the chapel was perfectly preserved. A miniature Gothic construction with intact stained glass and a massive oak door adorned with carved symbols that Thomas did not recognize. "How did this survive the fire?" he asked, both amazed and disturbed by the perfect preservation of the structure. "The fire never reached here," replied Agatha, removing an ancient key from her pocket. "Some say the flames refused to touch consecrated ground. Others, that what inhabits this chapel is more terrible than any fire." The key turned in the lock with a heavy click, and the door opened, revealing a surprisingly spacious interior. Dark wooden benches aligned in 2 rows, all facing a black stone altar. Above the altar, instead of Christian symbols, was a circular stained glass window representing the same image as on the gate, the pine tree intertwined with the serpent. The floor was polished stone, with an intricate circular design in the center of the chapel. Thomas approached, noticing that what initially appeared to be geometric decorations were, in fact, words in a language he did not recognize, arranged in a spiral. "It's ancient Aramaic," explained Agatha, observing his interest, "mixed with something even older. A a dialect that the Ahsfens brought from the old world. Thomas knelt to better examine the inscriptions. What does it mean? Those who have departed are never truly absent. Blood calls to blood across the veil. Agatha recited the words as if they were a familiar prayer. The Ahsfens performed their rituals here, Professor. These were not common religious services. As Thomas examined the floor, he noticed something strange. Small holes in the stone, strategically placed along the spiral of text. Each hole was approximately the diameter of a finger, and all seemed to converge toward the center of the circle. Drainage channels, he murmured, the horrible understanding forming in his mind. Precise and efficient, confirmed Agatha. The blood flowed from the outside to the center where... She pointed to what appeared to be a small circular opening at the exact center of the design. Thomas rose abruptly. Is there something beneath this chapel? The true heritage of the Ahsfens is below our feet, Professor. Generations of secrets, buried but never forgotten. Agatha walked to the altar and pressed something at its base. With a creak of stone against stone, a section of the circular floor began to move, revealing a spiral staircase that descended into darkness. Martha discovered this passage on the night before her last diary entry, explained Agatha, retrieving a lantern from a niche near the altar and lighting it. She shouldn't have gone down alone. No one should. Thomas hesitated at the top of the stairs. All his scientific and rational training screamed that he should retreat, that there was something deeply wrong with this place. But the historian's curiosity prevailed. What happened to Martha after the fire, he asked, following Agatha into the darkness below. Officially, Martha died in the fire, along with most of the servants and the Ahsfen family. The lantern light cast dancing shadows on the damp stone walls. Unofficially, Martha never left these lands, just like none of those who knew the family's true secrets. The staircase seemed to descend endlessly, turning in an increasingly tight spiral. The air became colder and more humid with each step, carrying a metallic odor reminiscent of dried blood and something else, a sweet, putrid smell that Thomas couldn't identify. Finally, they reached a circular chamber, much larger than Thomas expected to find beneath the small chapel. The walls were covered with shelves carved into the rock itself, and in each niche... "My God," whispered Thomas, involuntarily backing away. Each shelf contained a glass container, and inside each container, preserved in some type of amber liquid, was a human heart. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, aligned like macabre books in a library of horror. "The family collection," explained Agatha with disturbing calmness. "Each heart represents a life that contributed to the continuity of the Ahsfens." In the center of the chamber, directly under the opening in the floor of the chapel above, was a stone table with channels similar to those of the upper circle. Ancient surgical instruments, covered with rust and darkened stains, were methodically arranged on a tarnished silver tray. The Ahsfens believed that a person's essence, their soul if you prefer, resided in the heart, continued Agatha, moving through the chamber with the familiarity of someone who knew the space well. With the right ritual, that essence could be transferred, preserved, or consumed. Thomas felt nausea as he understood the implications. They ate the hearts, only on special occasions. Agatha smiled, a gesture that now seemed grotesque in the flickering light of the lantern. When a family member was dying, for example, the transfer required a suitable vessel, usually a healthy young person from the village, and the heart of the dying member. Thomas backed toward the stairs. The fire, it was deliberate, wasn't it? Someone discovered what was happening here. Martha wasn't the only one to discover the family's secrets. There were others. A group of men from the village, led by Eleanor's father, set fire to the mansion during a stormy night. Agatha approached a specific shelf, caressing one of the containers with something close to reverence. They believed they had destroyed the Ahsfens, that the fire would purify these lands. But the chapel survived. And this, Thomas gestured to the Macabre chamber. The true Ahsfens never depended on the mansion, Professor. Their true home was always down here, among the hearts of those who served them. Agatha turned to face him, her blue eyes now seeming to glow with their own light in the half-darkness. Do you know why no one in Hollow Creek talks about the Ahsfens? Why no one visits these lands? Thomas felt the blood freeze in his veins. Because they believe the family is still here. No, Professor. Agatha's smile widened, revealing strangely sharp teeth. Because they know the Ahsfens never left. Thomas backed up another step, his heart hammering against his ribs. Agatha's expression had subtly changed. Her eyes seemed younger than her face, alive with a predatory intensity. Who are you really? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I've already told you, Professor. I am Agatha Winters. She walked slowly around the stone table, her fingers sliding over the rusted instruments. I was born in 1832, daughter of a local merchant and his wife. At 16, I was invited to work at the Ahsfen mansion as a lady's companion to young Rebecca Ahsfen. Thomas calculated quickly. That would make you 77 years old, yes. Remarkably well preserved, don't you think? Agatha smiled again. Rebecca and I became intimate. She confided secrets to me that no other servant knew. She showed me this chamber when it was still in active use. What happened to Rebecca in the fire? A flash of pain crossed Agatha's face. Rebecca was pregnant at the time, 7 months. The baby would have been the next in the Ahsfen lineage. But there were complications. The child was positioned incorrectly, and the doctors feared the worst. She approached a specific section of the wall, where the containers seemed newer than the others. On the night of the fire, the family was performing a ritual. Not to save Rebecca, she was beyond saving, but to preserve the child. How would that be possible? Transfer, Professor. The child's essence would be preserved until a new vessel could be prepared. Agatha touched one of the flasks with delicacy, but the ritual was interrupted when the men from the village attacked. Rebecca died in the flames, along with most of the family. Thomas felt there was more to this story, something Agatha wasn't fully revealing. And you, how did you survive? I was down here preparing the chamber for the ritual. When I heard the commotion above, I hid. Her eyes lost themselves in memories. I remained hidden for 3 days until I was sure the invaders had left. When I emerged, I found only ruins and bodies. But you didn't leave the property. How could I? Agatha turned to him, her eyes suddenly moist. I had sworn loyalty to the Ahsfens. I had promised Rebecca I would care for her legacy. Thomas looked again at the containers on the shelves, a terrible suspicion forming in his mind. These hearts, some are from after the fire, aren't they? Agatha's smile returned, colder than before. Very observant, Professor. Yes, the collection continued to grow, even after the supposed extinction of the family. Lost travelers, mainly. People no one would miss. My God. Thomas felt the nausea return. You continued the rituals. Someone needed to preserve the knowledge, keep the lineage alive, if only in essence, until... She stopped abruptly. Until what? Until Ahsfen blood could flow again in living veins? Agatha approached Thomas, studying his face with disturbing intensity. Do you know why you felt so drawn to this story, Professor? Why, among all possible historical topics, you chose to investigate an obscure family in a forgotten corner of Tennessee? Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. What are you insinuating? Your mother never told you about her origins, about the grandmother she never knew. My mother was an orphan, Thomas replied automatically. Raised by a family in Nashville after being found abandoned at a church door in 1857, completed Agatha. A baby of approximately 6 months, with no identification except a small silver medallion. Thomas's blood froze in his veins. The medallion, He had carried it with him since his mother's death, a small silver object with an engraved symbol that he had never been able to fully identify. With trembling fingers, he removed the medallion from his vest pocket. The symbol, partially worn by time, was unmistakable now that he knew what to look for, a pine tree intertwined with a serpent. "Impossible," he murmured. "Rebecca managed to give birth before dying in the fire," explained Agatha, her eyes fixed on the medallion. "I found the child miraculously alive among the rubble. I knew I couldn't raise her there. The survivors from the village would return to ensure all the Ahsfens were dead. So I took the baby to Nashville for a new beginning." "You're saying my mother was the last Ahsfen by blood, and you, Professor, are the last descendant of the lineage?" Thomas staggered, leaning against the cold wall. His scientific mind fought against the revelation, seeking alternative explanations, coincidences, anything that could deny what he was hearing. "That's why you came," continued Agatha. "Blood calls to blood, even across generations. You felt the call without understanding it." "This is madness," protested Thomas. "I came here as a historian, nothing more." "And why did you choose this specific topic? Why did you feel so intrigued by a family that is barely mentioned in historical records?" Agatha approached, her voice almost hypnotic. "You dreamed of this place before coming, didn't you? Saw the pines, smelled the damp earth, heard voices calling your true name." Thomas wanted to deny it, but the words died in his throat. The dreams. He had been having them for months. Vivid dreams of a house he had never visited, of faces he had never seen, of a sense of belonging that accompanied him upon waking. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked, his voice little more than a whisper. "I want to complete what was interrupted 33 years ago," replied Agatha. "The Ahsfens can return through you, Thomas. Your blood carries the essence of generations. With the right ritual, you can become the vessel for all of them, for the accumulated wisdom, the power, the knowledge beyond mortal comprehension." She gestured to the preserved hearts. "Each of these will contribute. Each essence will unite with yours. You will be many in one, the pinnacle of the Ahsfen lineage." Thomas looked at the stairs, calculating his chances of escape. "And if I refuse?" Agatha's smile disappeared. "There is no possible refusal, Professor. You are the last. If not you, the lineage ends forever," she sighed, suddenly looking much older. "Besides, you're already here. You've already descended to the chamber voluntarily. The ritual began the moment you set foot on these lands." As if to confirm her words, Thomas realized that the only exit from the chamber, the staircase, had silently closed while they were talking. The sound of stone grinding against stone echoed through the chamber as Thomas watched in horror. The circular opening above, which had allowed dim light from the chapel to filter down, also sealed itself with a heavy stone slab. The only illumination now came from Agatha's lantern and several small oil lamps embedded in the walls that she began to light methodically. "You can't keep me here against my will," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the rising panic. "I'm not keeping you against your will, Thomas," Agatha replied calmly. "You are here because your blood called you here, because the essence of your ancestors recognized its home." She approached a section of the wall that appeared to be a solid stone, but with a gentle push, revealed itself to be a hidden cabinet. "The ritual requires preparation. We have until midnight." From the cabinet, she removed a set of ceremonial robes, deep crimson with intricate black embroidery depicting the now familiar pine and serpent motif. "These belong to your great-grandfather, Elias Ahsfen. They should fit you well enough." Thomas backed away. "I'm not participating in any ritual. This is madness, Agatha. Let me leave, and I promise I won't reveal what I've found here." Agatha's expression softened with something like pity. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about choice. The moment you touched Martha's diary, the moment you entered the chapel, the moment you descended these stairs, Each step was predetermined. The blood knows its purpose. She set the robes on a small table and turned to face him directly. "Let me show you something that might help you understand." Agatha approached one of the walls and pressed a specific stone. A section of the wall slid open, revealing another chamber beyond. This room was smaller, circular, with a domed ceiling painted with a night sky so realistic it seemed to move. In the center stood a pedestal holding a large leather-bound book. "The Ahsfen grimoire," she explained, gesturing for Thomas to approach. "The complete record of the family's knowledge, dating back to the old world. Every ritual, every transfer, every vessel, all documented here." Despite his fear, Thomas's scholarly curiosity drew him forward. The book was massive, its cover adorned with the same symbol as his medallion, but rendered in what appeared to be gold inlay and small gemstones. "Open it," Agatha urged. "See your heritage." With trembling hands, Thomas lifted the heavy cover. The pages were parchment, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved. The text was written in multiple languages. Some he recognized as Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, others completely foreign to him. Interspersed with the text were detailed anatomical drawings, astronomical charts, and ritual diagrams. As he turned the pages, he came across a family tree, meticulously updated over generations. His eyes followed the branches until they reached the bottom, and there, written in fresh ink that still seemed to glisten, was his own name, Thomas Blackwood, with his birth date and a blank space awaiting the date of his ascension. "This is impossible," he whispered. "How could my name be here? How could you have known?" "I didn't add your name, Thomas," Agatha said softly. "The book updates itself. It recognizes the blood. It has been waiting for you." Thomas staggered back from the pedestal. "What exactly is this ritual you're planning?" Agatha's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "The ritual of convergence. It will unite your consciousness with the preserved essences of your ancestors. You will retain your identity, but gain their memories, their knowledge, their power. You will become the vessel for the collective wisdom of generations. What happens to me, to who I am now? You will expand," she explained, her voice taking on a reverent quality. "Your consciousness will grow to encompass theirs. Think of it as awakening parts of yourself that have always been dormant. Memories you never knew you had, abilities you never knew you possessed." Thomas shook his head. "And if I still refuse?" Agatha sighed deeply. "Then the lineage ends, the knowledge is lost, and these O'Day," she gestured to the walls of preserved hearts, "all these sacrifices will have been for nothing." She approached him, her movements suddenly seeming younger, more fluid than her apparent age would suggest. "But you won't refuse, Thomas. I can see it in your eyes. The same curiosity that drove your ancestors, the same hunger for knowledge beyond ordinary understanding." Thomas couldn't deny the fascination he felt, even amidst the horror. The historian in him recognized the unprecedented opportunity to access centuries of lost knowledge. The scientist in him was intrigued by the impossible preservation techniques evident around him, and something deeper, something he couldn't name, responded to this place with a sense of recognition that terrified him. "How does the ritual work?" he asked finally, his voice barely audible. Agatha's smile widened. "The vessel, you, must be prepared, cleansed. The essences must be activated and harmonized, and then, at the moment of convergence, they will flow into you through the blood." "My blood? A small sacrifice," she assured him. "Nothing permanent. The body heals. It's the spirit that transforms." Thomas looked around the chamber, at the countless hearts preserved in their amber fluid, at the ancient book documenting generations of forbidden knowledge, at the woman who had somehow survived decades beyond her natural lifespan. Every rational part of him screamed to escape, to reject this madness. But another part, a part he hadn't known existed until he set foot on these lands, whispered that he had finally found his true purpose. "I need time," he said finally, "to think, to process all this." Agatha nodded, seemingly satisfied. Of course, but not too much time. The alignment is tonight, the first full moon of autumn, just as it was when Rebecca attempted to preserve your mother's essence. The cycle completes itself. She gestured toward a small alcove off the main chamber. There are quarters there where you can rest and reflect. Food and water have been prepared. The ritual begins at midnight. I will return then for your answer. As Agatha ascended a different staircase than the one they had entered by, Thomas was left alone among the preserved hearts of his apparent ancestors and their victims. The lantern light cast grotesque shadows on the walls, and the silence was absolute, except for the occasional drip of condensation from the ceiling. In the small alcove he found a cot, a table with bread, cheese and wine, and a basin of water. On the table lay a small book, not the massive grimoire, but a personal journal bound in faded blue leather. Opening it, he recognized Rebecca Ahsfen's handwriting from the letters he had found earlier. The journal detailed her pregnancy, her hopes for her child, and her growing fear as complications developed. The final entries spoke of the ritual planned to save her unborn child's essence if the birth proved fatal. March 15th, 1856. Agatha has prepared everything. If I cannot survive to raise my child, at least its essence will be preserved until a suitable vessel can be found. Mother assures me this is for the best, that the lineage must continue at any cost. I wonder, though, if we have gone too far, if what we preserve is truly what makes us human, or if it is something else entirely. Thomas closed the journal, his mind racing. The coincidences were too precise, the evidence too consistent to be a fabrication. Either he was trapped in an elaborate deception, or the impossible history of the Ahsfen family, his family, was true. As midnight approached, he heard footsteps on the stone stairs. Agatha had returned, now dressed in ceremonial robes, similar to those she had offered him, but in midnight blue rather than crimson. "Have you made your decision, Thomas?" she asked, her voice echoing in the chamber. Thomas stood, the medallion clutched in his hand. "I have questions first." "Of course. If I agree to this ritual, what happens afterward? What am I expected to do as this vessel?" Agatha's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "You would rebuild, restore the Ahsfen legacy. With your knowledge as a historian and the collective wisdom of your ancestors, you could reclaim your rightful place. The family has holdings beyond these lands, accounts in banks across the country, properties held under different names, all waiting for the rightful heir to claim them. And the practices, the rituals, would those continue? That would be for you to decide," she replied carefully. "The knowledge would be yours. How you use it would be your choice." Thomas nodded slowly, turning the medallion over in his fingers. "One last question. Martha's diary mentioned that those who know the family's secrets never leave these lands. What happened to her, Agatha? The truth." A shadow passed over Agatha's face. "Martha was resistant. She didn't understand the importance of the family's work. When she threatened to expose us to the village, measures had to be taken. You killed her. Her essence was preserved," Agatha corrected, gesturing to one of the containers on the wall. "She continues to serve the family, as she was always meant to." Thomas looked at the container she indicated, a heart floating in amber fluid, the glass slightly clouded with age. Something inside him hardened with